On the evening of April 18, 2008, in a quiet residential area of Tokyo's Koto ward, a chilling incident occurred that would shock the nation and come to be known as the Koto Mansion Spiriting Away murder case. As dusk settled over the city, 23-year-old Yurika Tojo returned home to her apartment after a long day at work. Little did she know that her neighbor, 33-year-old Takashi Hoshijima, had been lying in wait, harboring sinister intentions that would soon shatter the peace of their community. Yurika lived with her older sister in apartment 916 of a 9-story building. The sisters had chosen this particular complex for its modern security features, including surveillance cameras and an auto-locking entrance system. They believed these measures would keep them safe in the bustling metropolis. However, no one could have predicted the horror that lurked just 2 doors down in apartment 918. As Yurika inserted her key into the lock, Hoshijima suddenly appeared behind her and forced his way into her home. In a terrifying instant, he overpowered the young woman and dragged her back to his own apartment. Yurika's sister returned home later that evening to find signs of a struggle and traces of blood near the entrance. Alarmed, she immediately contacted the police. What followed was a baffling disappearance that gripped Japan's attention. Despite extensive searches of the building and surrounding area, there was no trace of Yurika. Security camera footage showed her entering the complex but never leaving. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leading the media to dub it a spiriting away case. For over a month, the mystery deepened. Yurika's family made emotional pleas on national television for any information about her whereabouts. The police conducted multiple sweeps of the building, interviewing residents and collecting forensic evidence. Hoshijima himself appeared on camera, feigning concern and speculating about what might have happened to his neighbor. Behind closed doors, however, a nightmarish scene was unfolding. Hoshijima had not only abducted and murdered Yurika but was methodically dismembering and disposing of her remains in a grotesque attempt to cover his tracks. He went to extraordinary lengths to conceal the crime, flushing some body parts down the toilet and gradually discarding others with his household trash. The breakthrough finally came on May 25 when police arrested Hoshijima on suspicion of trespassing. Further investigation uncovered DNA evidence linking him conclusively to Yurika's disappearance and death. The nation recoiled in horror as the full extent of his actions came to light. The Koto Mansion case sent shockwaves through Japanese society, shattering the sense of security many urban dwellers had come to take for granted. It raised urgent questions about the safety of young women living alone and the potential dangers lurking behind closed doors in crowded apartment complexes. The cruel irony that Yurika had been victimized in the very place meant to keep her safe, and by someone living just meters away, struck a deep chord of unease. The fact that Hoshijima had managed to carry out such a brutal crime undetected for weeks, despite the building's security measures, was particularly chilling. As more details emerged about Hoshijima's disturbing fantasies and meticulous efforts to evade justice, the public grappled with the existence of such darkness in their midst. The case would go on to become one of Japan's most infamous crimes of the 21st century, leaving an indelible mark on the national consciousness. In the sections that follow, we will delve deeper into the twisted mind of Takashi Hoshijima, trace the events of that fateful night and its aftermath, and examine how this shocking case unfolded from crime scene to courtroom. Through this exploration, we will confront difficult questions about human nature, justice, and the sometimes fragile fabric of modern urban society. About the perpetrator. Takashi Hoshijima was born on January 5, 1975, in Okayama City, Japan. He was the eldest of 4 siblings in a middle-class family. On the surface, there was little in his early life to suggest the darkness that would later emerge. However, a tragic accident in his infancy would cast a long shadow over his development and self-image. When Hoshijima was just 23 months old, he suffered severe burns to both of his legs in a household accident. He had climbed onto the cover of the family's bathtub, which gave way, plunging the toddler into scalding water. Though he survived, the burns left prominent keloid scars on his legs, marks that would become a source of deep shame and resentment as he grew older. As a child, Hoshijima was described by teachers as intelligent but withdrawn. He excelled academically, particularly in mathematics and computer science. However, he struggled socially and was frequently bullied by classmates who mocked his scarred legs. This early trauma and isolation appear to have planted the seeds for his later pathology. Hoshijima's relationship with his parents was strained from an early age. He later claimed that when he cried to his father about being bullied, he was harshly rebuked and told not to be weak. His mother, he felt, always took his father's side and could not be trusted with his problems. This perceived betrayal by those meant to protect him fostered a deep-seated anger towards his parents that would fester for decades. As he entered adolescence, Hoshijima became increasingly reclusive. He immersed himself in the worlds of anime, manga, and video games, particularly those with dark or violent themes. He began to develop twisted sexual fantasies, often centered around the idea of dominating and controlling women. However, his burns made him feel deeply insecure about his body, convinced that no woman would ever accept him romantically. After graduating high school, Hoshijima made the decision to move to Tokyo, eager to escape his family and start a new life. He found work as a programmer at a video game company, where his technical skills allowed him to thrive professionally even as he remained socially isolated. Colleagues described him as quiet but competent, noting that he seemed to have no close friends or romantic relationships. Over the next decade, Hoshijima's inner world grew increasingly warped. He became obsessed with the idea of creating a perfect sexual partner, a woman who would be completely subservient to his desires. He frequented prostitutes and escort services but found these encounters ultimately unsatisfying, as they lacked the total control he craved. Hoshijima began to produce disturbing amateur manga and doujinshi, self-published works, featuring graphic depictions of women being dismembered and sexually abused. On his personal blog, he wrote extensively about his fascination with dolls, human women reduced to mindless toys for men's pleasure. While deeply troubling, none of this online activity explicitly crossed legal lines that might have raised red flags with authorities. In February 2008, Hoshijima moved into the apartment in Koto ward where he would eventually commit his heinous crime. At this point, he was earning a comfortable salary as a freelance programmer, allowing him to afford the rent on his own. To his neighbors, he appeared to be a typical young professional, polite, if somewhat reserved. However, behind closed doors, Hoshijima's fantasies were reaching a fever pitch. He had convinced himself that he could reprogram a real woman to become his ideal sexual slave through a combination of psychological manipulation and physical domination. All he needed, he believed, was the opportunity to put his plan into action. When Yurika Tojo and her sister moved in 2 doors down from him in March, Hoshijima saw his chance. He began meticulously planning how he would abduct and train one of the women, settling on Yurika as his target. He studied their schedules, mapping out the optimal time to strike. In the weeks leading up to the crime, Hoshijima's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He barely slept, spending hours poring over bondage websites and refining his plans. He purchased supplies like rope and duct tape, as well as chemicals he believed could be used to dissolve a human body. In his warped mind, he was preparing for what he saw as the culmination of his life's purpose. It's crucial to note that while Hoshijima's troubled past and psychological issues provide context for his actions, they in no way excuse or mitigate the horror of his crimes. Many people face childhood trauma or social isolation without resorting to violence. Hoshijima made a series of conscious choices that led him down an increasingly dark path, ultimately resulting in an innocent young woman's death. One of the most chilling aspects of the case was Hoshijima's behavior in the weeks following Yurika's disappearance. He participated in community searches, spoke to reporters, and even comforted Yurika's distraught sister, all while secretly dismembering and disposing of Yurika's remains in his apartment. This level of deception and apparent lack of remorse stunned even veteran investigators. Psychological evaluations conducted after Hoshijima's arrest painted a complex picture. While he was deemed legally sane and fit to stand trial, experts identified severe personality disorders, including elements of narcissism, antisocial behavior, and sexual sadism. His obsession with control and domination was seen as stemming from deep-seated feelings of inadequacy related to his childhood burns. However, it's important to emphasize that Hoshijima was not some unthinking monster, but a man who made calculated decisions at every step. He was intelligent enough to nearly pull off what he believed would be the perfect crime. This makes his actions all the more disturbing, as they were the result of conscious choice rather than uncontrolled impulse. In his eventual confessions to police, Hoshijima displayed an unsettling detachment when describing his crimes. He spoke of Yurika as if she were an object, showing no apparent empathy for her suffering or recognition of her humanity. This cold, analytical approach extended even to the gruesome process of disposing of her remains, which he described in clinical detail. Perhaps most disturbingly, Hoshijima expressed frustration not at the harm he had caused, but at the failure of his plan to create a living doll. He genuinely seemed to believe that given more time, he could have broken Yurika's will and molded her into his ideal companion. This delusional thinking highlights the profound disconnect between Hoshijima's inner world and reality. As the Japanese public grappled with the details of the case, many were left wondering how such darkness could exist undetected in their society. Hoshijima's ability to maintain a facade of normalcy while harboring such violent impulses raised uncomfortable questions about the strangers we encounter in our daily lives. The case also sparked debate about the role of violent and sexually explicit media in shaping deviant behavior. While it's overly simplistic to blame Hoshijima's actions entirely on his consumption of extreme content, the connections between his fantasies and real-world violence were undeniable. Ultimately, Takashi Hoshijima stands as a chilling example of the capacity for evil that can lurk behind an unremarkable exterior. His case serves as a stark reminder of the importance of addressing mental health issues and social isolation before they can fester into something truly monstrous. Details of the incident. On the evening of April 18, 2008, the bustling streets of Tokyo's Koto ward were alive with the usual Friday night energy. Office workers streamed out of nearby stations, eager to start their weekends. Among them was 23-year-old Yurika Tojo, a bright and ambitious marketing assistant at a local advertising firm. Yurika had moved to Tokyo from her hometown in Hokkaido just a year earlier, chasing her dreams of a career in the fast-paced world of advertising. She shared a modest two-bedroom apartment with her older sister, Akiko, who had followed her to the capital to pursue her own career ambitions. The sisters were close, supporting each other as they navigated life in the big city. At around 7:30 p.m., Yurika entered the lobby of her apartment building, greeting the security guard with a cheerful wave. She took the elevator to the 9th floor, her mind already on the relaxing evening ahead. As she approached her door, apartment 916, she noticed nothing out of the ordinary. Just 2 doors down, in apartment 918, Takashi Hoshijima sat in near total darkness, his heart racing with anticipation. For weeks, he had been meticulously planning this moment, studying Yurika's routines and preparing his apartment for what he delusionally believed would be her training to become his perfect sexual slave. As Yurika inserted her key into the lock, Hoshijima made his move. In a flash, he was behind her, one hand clamped over her mouth to muffle her screams, the other arm wrapped tightly around her waist. Yurika struggled fiercely, but Hoshijima's adrenaline-fueled strength was too much for her slender frame. In the brief scuffle, Yurika's bag fell to the ground, spilling its contents. A few drops of blood from her cut lip stained the hallway carpet, a crucial piece of evidence that would later help unravel the mystery of her disappearance. Hoshijima dragged the terrified young woman into his apartment, slamming and locking the door behind them. Inside, he had prepared a makeshift restraint system using ropes and duct tape. He quickly bound Yurika's wrists and ankles, then gagged her with a cloth to prevent her from calling for help. What followed was a nightmare beyond imagination. Hoshijima, his mind clouded by years of violent fantasies, began what he called the reprogramming process. He subjected Yurika to a series of physical and psychological torments, depriving her of food and water, and forcing her to listen to recordings of his twisted ideology. Throughout this ordeal, Yurika fought back with remarkable courage and resilience. Despite her terror, she refused to submit to Hoshijima's will, holding on to hope that someone would come to her rescue. Meanwhile, Yurika Tojo returned home around 8:45 p.m. to find the apartment empty. At first, she wasn't overly concerned. Yurika sometimes went out with coworkers on Friday evenings. However, when she noticed her sister's bag and shoes in the entryway, along with small traces of blood, alarm bells began to ring. Akiko tried calling Yurika's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She then contacted some of Yurika's friends and coworkers, growing increasingly frantic as no one had seen or heard from her sister. By 10 p.m., Akiko's worry had turned to full-blown panic. She called the police to report Yurika missing. Officers arrived at the apartment complex shortly before 11 p.m. They conducted a preliminary search of the building and surrounding area but found no immediate signs of Yurika. The blood traces in the hallway were noted, but at this point, there was no clear evidence of foul play. Inside apartment 918, Hoshijima heard the commotion in the hallway. Panic began to set in as he realized his carefully laid plans were unraveling far more quickly than he had anticipated. In a moment of brutal calculation, he decided that silencing Yurika permanently was his only option for avoiding detection. At approximately 11:15 p.m., Hoshijima took a kitchen knife and, in an act of unthinkable cruelty, stabbed Yurika multiple times in the neck and chest. The young woman, who had endured hours of torment with remarkable strength, finally succumbed to her injuries. Her last thoughts were likely of her family and the life that had been so viciously stolen from her. With Yurika dead, Hoshijima's twisted mind shifted into self-preservation mode. He knew he had to dispose of the body quickly and thoroughly if he hoped to escape justice. What followed was a grotesque and meticulous process that would stretch on for days. First, Hoshijima moved Yurika's body to his bathroom, where he began the grisly task of dismemberment. Using a combination of kitchen knives and a small handsaw, he worked through the night to separate the body into manageable pieces. He was careful to contain the blood and other fluids, using plastic sheeting in his bathtub to minimize evidence. As dawn broke on April 19, Hoshijima had to pause his macabre work. He knew that the building would soon be buzzing with activity as the search for Yurika intensified. He carefully cleaned himself and his apartment, hiding the partially dismembered remains in various concealed spots throughout his home. That morning, police officers went door to door in the building, questioning residents about any unusual activity they might have witnessed. When they knocked on Hoshijima's door, he answered calmly, expressing shock and concern about his neighbor's disappearance. He even volunteered information about Yurika's usual schedule, playing the role of a helpful and observant neighbor. This interaction was a testament to Hoshijima's chilling ability to compartmentalize and maintain a facade of normalcy. Even as Yurika's remains lay hidden just feet away, he was able to look officers in the eye and lie convincingly about his lack of involvement. Over the next several days, Hoshijima continued the gruesome process of disposing of Yurika's remains. He worked in short bursts, usually late at night or early in the morning when he was least likely to be disturbed. His methods were methodical and calculated, designed to leave as little trace as possible. Hoshijima used a variety of techniques to get rid of the body parts. Some smaller pieces were ground up and flushed down the toilet. Others were wrapped tightly in plastic bags and discarded with his regular trash, carefully distributed across multiple days to avoid suspicion. He even resorted to dissolving some remains in strong chemicals, a process that filled his apartment with noxious fumes. Throughout this period, the search for Yurika continued to intensify. Her case had captured national attention, with her photo appearing on news broadcasts and in newspapers across Japan. The mysterious nature of her disappearance, vanishing from a supposedly secure building without a trace, fueled public fascination and fear in equal measure. Hoshijima, in a display of breathtaking audacity, inserted himself into the investigation. He spoke to reporters gathered outside the building, speculating about what might have happened to Yurika and lamenting the loss of security in their community. He even participated in a candlelight vigil organized by Yurika's friends and family, standing shoulder to shoulder with those mourning the very woman he had murdered. This behavior served a dual purpose for Hoshijima. On one hand, it allowed him to closely monitor the progress of the investigation, gathering valuable information about what the police knew. On the other, he believed that by playing the role of a concerned neighbor, he could deflect any potential suspicion away from himself. As the days turned into weeks, the initial frenzy of the investigation began to wane. While the police continued to pursue leads, the trail was growing cold. Yurika's family, however, refused to give up hope. They made repeated appeals on television, begging for any information that might lead to her whereabouts. For Hoshijima, this period was one of constant tension. Every knock on the door, every police siren in the distance sent his heart racing. He became paranoid, convinced that at any moment his crimes would be discovered. This stress began to take a toll on his mental state, pushing him further into delusion and fantasy. In his twisted mind, Hoshijima began to rationalize his actions. He told himself that Yurika's death had been necessary, even merciful. He fantasized about finding another victim, one who would be more compliant to his desires. These thoughts, rather than filling him with remorse, only fueled his dangerous obsessions. The breakthrough in the case came on May 25, over a month after Yurika's disappearance. Police analysts, reviewing security camera footage for what felt like the 100th time, noticed a small but crucial detail. In one frame, barely visible, was what appeared to be Hoshijima's arm reaching out to grab Yurika just as she entered her apartment. This tiny piece of evidence was enough for police to obtain a warrant to search Hoshijima's apartment. When officers arrived at his door, Hoshijima knew immediately that his time was up. In a final act of desperation, he attempted to barricade himself inside, but the police quickly broke down the door. The scene that greeted investigators was one of unimaginable horror. Though Hoshijima had managed to dispose of most of Yurika's remains, traces of blood and other evidence were found throughout the apartment. In the bathroom, they discovered some of the tools Hoshijima had used to dismember the body, still stained with blood despite his efforts to clean them. Most damning of all was a small freezer tucked away in a closet. Inside, wrapped in layers of plastic, were several body parts that Hoshijima had not yet had the opportunity to dispose of. DNA testing would later confirm that these belonged to Yurika. Hoshijima, realizing the futility of further denial, broke down and confessed to the murder. His admission was cold and matter-of-fact, devoid of any apparent remorse or emotion. He recounted the details of the crime with a detachment that chilled even veteran investigators to the bone. In the days that followed, police worked tirelessly to piece together the full extent of Hoshijima's crimes. They combed through his computer and personal belongings, uncovering a trove of disturbing material that shed light on the depths of his depravity. Forensic teams scoured every inch of the apartment building and the surrounding area, recovering additional fragments of evidence. They even went so far as to examine the pipes and sewage system of the building, where trace amounts of DNA matching Yurika's were found. The discovery of Yurika's fate sent shockwaves through Japanese society. The fact that such a brutal crime could occur in the heart of Tokyo, in a supposedly secure apartment building, shattered many people's sense of safety. It raised uncomfortable questions about the anonymity of urban life and the potential dangers lurking behind closed doors. For Yurika's family, the news brought a devastating end to their weeks of desperate hope. While there was some small comfort in finally knowing what had happened to their loved one, the brutality of her death was almost too much to bear. In press conferences, Akiko spoke of her sister's kindness and vibrant spirit, vowing to honor her memory by advocating for better protection for young women living alone in cities. As the full details of the crime emerged, public outrage reached a fever pitch. There were calls for stricter background checks for apartment tenants and improved security measures in residential buildings. The case also sparked debates about mental health awareness and the need for better systems to identify and help troubled individuals before they turn to violence. Hoshijima's trial, which began in January 2009, was one of the most closely watched in recent Japanese history. The prosecution painted a damning picture of a calculating killer who had meticulously planned and executed a horrific crime. They argued that the premeditated nature of the murder, combined with the extreme cruelty shown in the treatment of Yurika's body, warranted the death penalty. The defense, while not denying Hoshijima's guilt, attempted to argue for leniency based on his troubled childhood and mental state. They presented evidence of his social isolation and the psychological impact of his childhood injury, suggesting that proper intervention earlier in his life might have prevented the tragedy. Throughout the trial, Hoshijima himself remained largely impassive. He spoke only when directly questioned, offering clinical descriptions of his actions without any apparent emotional connection to their impact. This cold demeanor only served to further horrify the public and strengthen the calls for the harshest possible sentence. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the court found Hoshijima guilty on all counts. In February 2009, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in delivering the verdict, spoke of the unthinkable cruelty of the crime and the need to protect society from such dangerous individuals. The case of the Koto mansion spiriting away murder left an indelible mark on Japanese society. It served as a grim reminder of the darkness that can exist behind seemingly normal facades and the vulnerability of young people living alone in big cities. Yurika Tojo's memory lives on through her family's advocacy work and the changes implemented in her name to improve urban safety. For those involved in the investigation and trial, the case remains a haunting example of the depths of human depravity. It stands as a stark reminder of the importance of community vigilance, mental health awareness, and the ongoing need to protect the vulnerable in our society. Investigation and trial. The investigation into Yurika Tojo's disappearance began as a missing person case but quickly evolved into one of the most complex and high-profile criminal investigations in recent Japanese history. From the initial report on April 18, 2008, to the arrest of Takashi Hoshijima on May 25, and through the subsequent trial, law enforcement and the judicial system faced numerous challenges in bringing this horrific crime to justice. In the immediate aftermath of Yurika's disappearance, the police response was swift but initially hampered by a lack of clear evidence. The first officers on the scene noted the small blood traces in the hallway outside Yurika's apartment but found no signs of forced entry or a struggle inside the unit itself. This led to early speculation that Yurika might have left of her own accord, possibly to meet someone. However, as the hours turned into days with no contact from Yurika, the tone of the investigation shifted. Her family vehemently insisted that she would never vanish without warning, describing her as responsible and devoted to her job and studies. Yurika's employer confirmed that she had not requested any time off and that her work performance had been excellent. A breakthrough came when investigators reviewed security camera footage from the building's lobby. While the cameras didn't cover the hallways on individual floors, they clearly showed Yurika entering the building on the evening of April 18 but never leaving. This conclusively placed her disappearance within the confines of the apartment complex, narrowing the focus of the investigation dramatically. Police began a methodical sweep of the entire building, interviewing every resident and searching common areas for any clues. It was during this process that they first encountered Takashi Hoshijima. In his initial interview, Hoshijima appeared cooperative, expressing concern for his neighbor and offering what seemed like helpful information about Yurika's usual comings and goings. At this stage, Hoshijima was just one of many residents being questioned, and his calm demeanor didn't immediately raise suspicions. However, astute detectives noted a few inconsistencies in his statements, particularly regarding his whereabouts on the night of Yurika's disappearance. These discrepancies, while not damning in themselves, were carefully logged for future reference. As days passed without any sign of Yurika, the investigation began to attract significant media attention. The mysterious nature of her vanishing, seemingly into thin air from a secure building, captured the public imagination. Daily press conferences became a fixture, with police facing mounting pressure to provide answers. Behind the scenes, investigators were pursuing multiple angles. They delved into Yurika's personal life, examining her relationships, financial records, and online activities for any clues. They also began to take a closer look at the other residents of the building, including Hoshijima. A crucial breakthrough came when forensic experts managed to enhance and analyze footage from a security camera in a neighboring building. In one frame, they spotted what appeared to be an arm reaching out to grab someone just outside the frame. potentially the moment Yurika was attacked. While the image was too blurry to identify the assailant conclusively, it provided the first concrete evidence that a crime had indeed occurred. Armed with this new information, investigators redoubled their efforts to scrutinize the building's residents. They began to take a particular interest in Hoshijima, whose apartment was in close proximity to where the attack seemed to have taken place. Detectives dug into Hoshijima's background, uncovering his history of social isolation and his troubling online activities. While none of this was illegal in itself, it began to paint a picture of a deeply disturbed individual. However, without hard evidence linking him to Yurika's disappearance, they couldn't move forward with an arrest. The turning point came when investigators, reviewing records of the building's water usage, noticed an unusual spike in consumption from Hoshijima's apartment in the days following Yurika's disappearance. This, combined with reports from neighbors of strange odors emanating from his unit, was enough to secure a search warrant. On May 25, 2008, a team of officers arrived at Hoshijima's door. His attempt to barricade himself inside only served to confirm their suspicions. Once they breached the apartment, the horrifying truth of what had transpired became apparent. The evidence found in Hoshijima's apartment was overwhelming. Traces of Yurika's blood were detected in multiple locations, despite Hoshijima's efforts to clean. The tools used to dismember her body were discovered, along with the small freezer containing her remaining body parts. Perhaps most chillingly, investigators found Hoshijima's detailed notes describing his process and fantasies. Faced with the mountain of evidence against him, Hoshijima confessed to the crime. His admission was cold and clinical, lacking any apparent remorse. He recounted the details of Yurika's abduction, murder, and the disposal of her remains with a detachment that disturbed even veteran investigators. In the wake of Hoshijima's arrest, the focus of the investigation shifted to building an airtight case for prosecution. Forensic teams meticulously documented every piece of physical evidence. They also embarked on the grim task of trying to recover more of Yurika's remains, searching the building's plumbing system and nearby waste disposal sites. The prosecution team, led by experienced attorney Kenji Watanabe, worked closely with investigators to construct a comprehensive narrative of the crime. They were determined to not only prove Hoshijima's guilt beyond any doubt but also to demonstrate the premeditated and exceptionally cruel nature of his actions. As the investigation progressed, disturbing details about Hoshijima's past began to emerge. Former colleagues and acquaintances came forward with accounts of his odd behavior and unsettling comments. His online activities, including his fascination with extreme pornography and violence against women, were thoroughly documented. While not directly related to Yurika's murder, this information helped prosecutors build a profile of Hoshijima as a dangerous predator who had long harbored violent fantasies. The trial of Takashi Hoshijima began on January 13, 2009, at the Tokyo District Court. From the outset, it was clear that this would be no ordinary proceeding. The courtroom was packed with journalists and members of the public, all eager to witness justice being served in this shocking case. Lead prosecutor Kenji Watanabe opened the trial with a powerful statement, detailing the horrific nature of the crime and painting a vivid picture of Yurika Tojo's final hours. He emphasized the premeditated nature of Hoshijima's actions, arguing that this was not a crime of passion or momentary insanity, but a carefully planned act of unspeakable cruelty. The prosecution's case was built on a mountain of physical evidence. Forensic experts testified about the blood traces found in Hoshijima's apartment, the DNA evidence linking him to Yurika's remains, and the tools used in her dismemberment. They presented a detailed timeline of events, corroborated by security camera footage, witness statements, and Hoshijima's own confession. Perhaps the most compelling, and disturbing, evidence came in the form of Hoshijima's own writings. The prosecution introduced pages from his personal journals and online posts, revealing the depths of his violent fantasies and his long-held desire to own and reprogram a woman. These writings provided a chilling insight into the mindset that led to Yurika's murder. Throughout the trial, Hoshijima remained largely impassive. He sat silently in the defendant's box, rarely showing any emotion even as the most gruesome details of his crimes were recounted. This cold demeanor only served to further horrify the courtroom and strengthen the prosecution's portrayal of him as a remorseless killer. The defense team, led by attorney Masaru Tanaka, faced an uphill battle from the start. Given the overwhelming evidence against their client, they did not attempt to argue his innocence. Instead, their strategy focused on trying to mitigate the sentence by highlighting Hoshijima's troubled past and potential mental health issues. Tanaka argued that Hoshijima's actions were the result of severe psychological disturbance, stemming from childhood trauma and years of social isolation. He called expert witnesses who testified about the long-term effects of Hoshijima's burn injuries and the impact of his obsessive consumption of violent media. The defense also attempted to portray the murder as an impulsive act rather than a premeditated crime. They argued that Hoshijima had initially intended only to abduct Yurika and that the killing occurred in a moment of panic when he feared discovery. This line of argument aimed to avoid the death penalty, which can be imposed in Japan for particularly heinous premeditated murders. However, the prosecution strongly contested this characterization. They pointed to Hoshijima's meticulous planning, his purchase of materials for restraining and disposing of a body weeks before the crime, and his calculated efforts to cover up the murder afterward. Watanabe argued that these actions clearly demonstrated premeditation and a complete disregard for human life. One of the most heart-wrenching moments of the trial came when Yurika's sister, Akiko, took the stand to deliver a victim impact statement. She spoke movingly of Yurika's kindness, her dreams for the future, and the devastating impact her loss had on their family. Many in the courtroom, including some of the typically stoic court officials, were visibly moved by her testimony. As the trial progressed, public interest remained intense. The case had reignited debates about the death penalty in Japan, with many calling for its application in this instance. Others used the trial as a platform to discuss broader issues of women's safety, mental health awareness, and the potential dangers of extreme online content. After weeks of testimony and arguments, the trial concluded on February 18, 2009. In a packed courtroom, Judge Kiichi Hirade delivered the verdict. Takashi Hoshijima was found guilty on all counts, including murder, kidnapping, and desecration of a corpse. In his sentencing statement, Judge Hirade described the crime as one of unthinkable cruelty that had caused immeasurable suffering to Yurika and her loved ones. He acknowledged the defense's arguments regarding Hoshijima's mental state but ultimately concluded that the defendant was fully aware of the nature and consequences of his actions. The court sentenced Hoshijima to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, stopping short of the death penalty sought by the prosecution. Judge Hirade explained that while the crime certainly met the threshold of extreme heinousness required for capital punishment in Japan, the court had taken into account Hoshijima's lack of prior criminal history and his eventual confession. The sentencing was met with mixed reactions. While many expressed relief that Hoshijima would never again be free to harm anyone, others felt that only the death penalty could truly serve justice for such a horrific crime. Yurika's family, while disappointed that the ultimate punishment was not imposed, expressed gratitude that the legal process had concluded and that Hoshijima would remain behind bars for the rest of his life. In the aftermath of the trial, several important legal and societal changes were set in motion. The case sparked a review of tenant screening processes in apartment buildings, leading to more stringent background checks in many urban areas. It also prompted discussions about improving mental health resources and early intervention programs for troubled individuals. The investigation and trial of Takashi Hoshijima stand as a testament to the dedication of Japan's law enforcement and judicial system in pursuing justice for Yurika Tojo. While nothing could undo the tragedy of her loss, the thorough and transparent legal process helped provide some closure to her family and to a nation shaken by this terrible crime. The case remains a somber reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind seemingly normal facades and the importance of community vigilance and support systems in preventing such tragedies. Yurika's memory lives on through her family's advocacy work and the changes implemented in the wake of this case to improve safety and mental health awareness in Japan. The Koto Mansion spiriting away murder case left an indelible mark on Japanese society, sparking intense debate and prompting significant changes in various spheres. The shocking nature of the crime, a young woman brutally murdered in what should have been the safety of her own home, forced a national reckoning with issues of urban safety, mental health, and the dark undercurrents of modern life. In the immediate aftermath of the trial, criminal psychologists and legal experts weighed in on the case, offering insights into Takashi Hoshijima's mindset and the factors that may have contributed to his actions. Many pointed to his social isolation, troubled childhood, and obsessive consumption of violent media as warning signs that had gone unnoticed or unaddressed. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a prominent forensic psychologist, noted that while Hoshijima's case was extreme, it highlighted the potential dangers of prolonged social withdrawal, a phenomenon known as hikikomori in Japan. This case underscores the need for better community support systems and early intervention programs for individuals showing signs of severe social maladjustment, Dr. Tanaka stated in a widely cited paper. The media coverage of the case was extensive and often sensationalistic, with 24-hour news channels providing minute-by-minute updates during the investigation and trial. This wall-to-wall coverage had a profound impact on public perception, heightening fears about violent crime and leading to a surge in sales of home security systems. However, some critics argued that the media's intense focus on the gruesome details of the crime overshadowed important discussions about its root causes and prevention. Noted sociologist Dr. Hiroshi Yamamoto commented, "While public awareness is important, the voyeuristic nature of some reporting risk normalizing violence and obscuring the deeper societal issues at play." The impact on Yurika Tojo's family and the local community was devastating and long-lasting. Yurika's sister, Akiko, became a vocal advocate for victims' rights and improved urban safety measures. In interviews, she spoke of the ripple effect of such a violent crime, describing how it had shattered not only her family but also the sense of security in their entire neighborhood. The apartment complex where the murder took place became a somber tourist attraction of sorts, with many residents choosing to move away. Local community leaders worked to rebuild a sense of trust and safety, organizing neighborhood watch programs and community events to bring people together. In response to the case, lawmakers introduced several new measures aimed at preventing similar tragedies. These included stricter background check requirements for apartment rentals in urban areas and increased funding for mental health awareness programs. The Yurika Law, passed in 2010, mandated improved security features in new apartment buildings, including better surveillance systems and secure entry protocols. The case also had a significant impact on Japan's ongoing debate about the death penalty. While Hoshijima ultimately received a life sentence, many argued that his crimes warranted capital punishment. The decision not to pursue the death penalty in this instance led to calls for clearer guidelines on when it should be applied in particularly heinous cases. In the years following the trial, several books and documentaries examined the case from various angles. These works not only recounted the details of the crime but also explored broader themes of alienation in modern urban society, the impact of extreme media on vulnerable individuals, and the challenges of maintaining community bonds in an increasingly isolated world. The legacy of the Koto mansion case continues to resonate in Japanese society. Annual vigils are held in Yurika's memory, serving as a reminder of the need for vigilance and community support. Her story is now often cited in discussions about women's safety and the importance of looking out for one's neighbors in urban environments. Ultimately, the case of Takashi Hoshijima and Yurika Tojo serves as a stark reminder of the darkness that can exist behind closed doors and the vital importance of social connections and mental health support. While the tragedy cannot be undone, the changes and awareness it sparked may help prevent future such incidents, ensuring that Yurika's memory continues to make a positive impact on society. As Japan continues to grapple with issues of isolation, mental health, and public safety, the Koto mansion case remains a powerful cautionary tale, a somber reminder of the potential consequences when society fails to notice and address the struggles of its most troubled members.